In 1977, the U.S. Air Force built a flying tank, a jet so ugly, so slow, so brutally simple that pilots fell in love with it instantly. They called it the Warthog. It carried a cannon the size of a Volkswagen. It could survive hits that would turn any other fighter into a fireball. It saved thousands of American lives on the ground. And in 2026, the U.S. Air Force is finally killing it. Not because it failed, not because it stopped working. The A-10 is being retired for reasons that have almost nothing to do with the aircraft itself and everything to do with a war that hasn't happened yet. Stick around, because the real story of the Warthog's death is stranger and more important than you think. Section 1. The plane that refused to die. To understand why this retirement is such a big deal, you have to understand what the A-10 actually is. This isn't a multi-role fighter. It isn't fast. It isn't stealthy. It was built around one single piece of hardware, the GAU-8 Avenger, a 7-barrel rotary cannon that fires depleted uranium shells the size of beer bottles at a rate of 3,900 rounds per minute. The MiG was essentially designed around the gun, not the other way around. Everything else about the A-10 was built for one job: keep the pilot alive over the battlefield. The cockpit sits inside a titanium bathtub, a literal armored bucket thick enough to shrug off 23mm anti-aircraft fire. It has 2 engines, mounted high and separated, so a hit to one doesn't take out the other. It has redundant flight controls, backup hydraulics, and a design so tough that A-10s have flown home missing entire chunks of wing. For decades, the Pentagon tried to kill this plane. In the 1990s, again in the 2000s, again in 2015. Every single time, Congress stepped in because on the ground, soldiers loved it and lawmakers listened. The A-10 became almost politically untouchable, a flying symbol of close air support that generals couldn't retire no matter how hard they tried. So what changed? Why is 2026 different from every failed retirement attempt before it? Section 2. The real reason it's not about the plane. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The Air Force isn't retiring the A-10 because it got worse at its job. They're retiring it because the job itself changed. The Warthog was built for a specific kind of war-permissive airspace: slow loitering over a battlefield, insurgents with rifles and technicals, not surface-to-air missile networks. That was Iraq. That was Afghanistan. For 20 years, the A-10 owned the skies because nothing was shooting back with anything sophisticated. That world is gone. Military planners are no longer designing forces around counterinsurgency. They're designing around a potential fight with a peer adversary, a nation with advanced radar, long-range surface-to-air missiles, and a modern integrated air defense system. In that environment, a slow, low-flying, non-stealth aircraft isn't a battlefield hero. It's a target. The same armor and toughness that made the A-10 legendary against small arms fire means almost nothing against a modern missile system that can track and kill it from 50 miles away before the pilot even knows it's coming. This is the part most people miss. The A-10 isn't being replaced because a better close air support plane exists. It's being retired because the entire mission it was built for is being deprioritized. The Air Force is betting its future on a different kind of war. Section 3. What's replacing it and why that's controversial. So what fills the gap? Officially, the answer is a mix: the F-35A, armed drones, and rotary wing attack aircraft like the Apache, all coordinating through modern data links. The Air Force argues that close air support today doesn't need a plane that flies low and slow over the target. It needs precision-guided munitions dropped from altitude, guided by sensors that see the battlefield better than a human eye ever could. But here's where it gets controversial. Ground troops, the people who actually call in air support in combat, have pushed back for years. There is something psychologically different about hearing the burst of a Warthog's cannon overhead versus a fast mover dropping a bomb from 30,000 feet. Pilots flying the A-10 can see the battlefield, loiter for hours, and make split-second judgment calls in ways a jet screaming past at 500 knots simply cannot. Critics argue the Pentagon is optimizing for a hypothetical future war while quietly accepting more risk in the counterinsurgency and low-intensity conflicts that are still, statistically, far more likely to happen in the next decade. It's a bet, and if it's wrong, the cost won't be paid by planners in the Pentagon. It'll be paid by troops on the ground with no Warthog circling overhead. Section 4. The end of an era. The last A-10 squadrons are being drawn down through the late 2020s, with the fleet fully retired by the end of the decade. Some airframes will go to museums. Some will be used for testing. Most will simply be scrapped, cut into pieces at the Boneyard in Arizona, the same desert where thousands of retired aircraft go to die. It's easy to be sentimental about this. The A-10 has a fan base. Most fighter jets could only dream of a cult following built on decades of pilots and soldiers swearing that nothing else could do what it did. But the harder truth is this: militaries don't retire weapons because they're bad. They retire them when the war they were built for stops being the war that's coming next. The Warthog wasn't beaten by a better plane. It was beaten by time, and by a strategic pivot the Air Force has been building toward for over a decade. Whether that bet pays off, whether the next war looks like the ones planners are preparing for, is something we won't know until it's too late to change course. So the real question isn't why the A-10 is being retired. It's whether the world is actually ready for what comes after it. If you want to understand exactly what's replacing it and whether it can really do the Warthog's job, that's a story for another video. Make sure you're subscribed because we're covering it next.